back to my channel. I am so glad that you're here again. I don't know if you can tell, but my background is a little bit different today because I have moved everything that I had for my art and everything. I made a little studio in my house and a new room, and this is something I've been wanting to do for a while because I just had this empty room that was like the office with nothing but like a computer in it, and it was just like I never took the time to move everything in here because this took like 2 weeks to fully move everything. I know it doesn't look like it should have taken this long, but there was like a lot of things that I had to move around and cables and a lot of technical parts, but everything is finally moved in here, and I have changed a little bit my bookshelf because before I used to have every single one of my books here, but I decided to separate my reading area from my art area, and here I'm only gonna have my art books and art related things, my sketchbooks, journals, all of that. And then I'm making a little reading nook in my living room later that I will be showing once my stuff arrives because I just ordered my bookshelf, so I'm waiting for that. But it's gonna be so fun. I'm gonna be decorating my house for the next couple weeks. I'm gonna be painting walls and everything, and I will make a video of all of that because I really want like a little bit of an academia / vampire vibe to the house, and right now it's just very blank. All the walls are white and I don't really have any cohesive decoration going on, so it was time to change that. But yeah, that's the reason why it looks a little different in here. But what we're really here for is for this week's study with me. I am bringing you today one of I'm gonna say actually so far my favorite of the artists that I have studied so far, and we're gonna be talking about Edgar Degas. This whole topic has been my most interesting one so far for me, just because the part that is about the artist himself and obviously his art as well, but the part about the artist itself, I think so far it's been the craziest one that I have studied about yet. And even though there's so many really inspiring, really great people, or maybe not even great, but just inspiring nonetheless, that I have studied and I am yet to study so far, I definitely think that Edgar Degas is one of the weirdest. And you know, weird doesn't necessarily mean good or bad, but it was definitely interesting, and that is why I'm here today. I looked up his information in many different places. I usually, and I think I've mentioned this before, I usually use the Met's website. Whether it is about the artist himself or the work, I really like the way that they have a short explanation for things, like it's not very extensive. So I do like to start with the Met's website just because it's like a little bit easier to get in topic because it's like the short version. And then I like to expand that with wiki art for the paintings, because there you can find, for each individual painting, you can find a little bit of the story behind it, and depending on which painting, some have a little bit more of an information page to them. You can find a lot there, so I really like using wiki art for that. And this time I also watched a documentary on YouTube that I don't remember the name of the channel, but I will put it here. But yeah, it was really good. I just popped on my Bluetooth headphones out of the coffee shop and I was taking notes as I listened to the documentary and then read a little bit of it. It was really fun, it was really interesting, and really captivating because I didn't really know much about Degas. I know that he has a lot of famous ballerina paintings, and I knew that he was weird. That's pretty much all I knew. But I will say, I want to say this before I talk about his story, just because I feel like it's so much more dark, I guess, when you see the contrast. And it is that because his most famous paintings are the ballerinas, I always thought, not knowing anything about him at all, I know if you do know anything about him, you'd be like, girl, but not knowing absolutely anything about Degas other than he loved to paint ballerinas, I thought of it as some form of admiration. I thought maybe it was his way of showing his appreciation for the art form, or maybe he's one of the very few feminist artists at the time. Now knowing the story, I literally would laugh at myself, and that is absolutely so sad. But yeah, I don't know, I just thought that somebody who painted so much of these people, okay, you're painting people and you obviously have a sort of like a fanatism with them, and I now using that word can obviously see how that is actually not necessarily a good thing, but at the time I thought it was more of a form of appreciation. But let's get into it. Again, like always, I have my notes here, so if you ever see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes. So first, let's start talking a little bit about Degas and his origins in the art world. He was born in 1834 into a wealthy family, and this allowed him to be able to study arts in a way that a lot of artists were not able to. He received a really good education, and he was even allowed to go into the Louvre and study some of the paintings that were there. He later went to Italy, where he would also draw the everyday people, the normal life that they lived, and he would also go to museums and try to recreate some of the paintings with his sketches. But that is where he met Monet. They had a very interesting relationship because it was defined as difficult, where they would challenge each other but also push each other to try new things in art. So it was almost like a little bit of a competition between them. And Monet was the one to introduce Degas to some more contemporary subjects, but it is said that Degas would go a little further than Monet in his subjects. An example of this being one of Degas' painting called The Interior, or Interior. And it proves his dark view as a young woman in her room has this man right on her door looking inside. And you can tell how his things are scattered around her bedroom, showing in a way how he has power over her. There is also symbolism in the scissors that we see in the painting, reflecting the loss of virginity. So this painting being a really dark depiction of this young girl under this older man's power. But something that is interesting to note about this is that this was a normal kind of subject for Degas, where he would paint women, most cases young women, in very complicated situations, most of them being the kind of situations that people would rarely want to be shown to the world. A lot of these times, the women were either dressing or undressing, they were bathing, they were in very vulnerable positions. And something that shows a little more how uncomfortable the situation was is that these women rarely would look into the viewer. They were painted in an angle that showed them in a way that looked almost non-consensual, or that the woman knew that he was there, but they did not want to be part of this. In many cases, we can also see how the perspective of the viewer is almost like a person watching an animal in a zoo. We're seeing these women doing the private activities that the people at the time would rarely get to see, especially the men. Men would love to have a glimpse of what the private life of women was like. And in this case, that is exactly what he's doing. He's showing the parts that women wanted to keep to themselves. There's another really interesting point that I read in my book about this, and the book is Impressionism, 50 Things You Should Know. 50 Paintings You Should Know. I think I bought these at an art museum in Tennessee. I don't remember the name of it, but yeah, here we have a lot of Impressionism paintings, and they're divided by artists, so there's not all the paintings in here, just some. But I did find really interesting that even though it doesn't go as in-depth as some of the information that I found online, you can see how this view of Degas and women was present in all his paintings that depict women. So here we have the woman ironing, and it's literally just what the name says. It's a woman ironing. He would often go to places where women would work, these kind of jobs that were very physically demanding, that would get you hot and tired, and It's not the kind of job where you would worry about your appearance too much, and that is exactly what he was looking for. Again, in his hunt to try to find women acting different than what they wanted the world to see them, which I think, first of all, is absolutely insane. Like, this is what they want you to see, but he's like, I want to see more than what you are willing to give me. Crazy. Now, the reason for him to go to these places, it's because as these women were working, like I said, they would not be worrying too much about their appearance. And that doesn't mean that they looked bad. What I mean by that is that they wouldn't worry too much about their clothes slipping off a little bit, a shoulder was showing a little bit. You're working hard, and even in this painting we can see that. You can see how one of these woman's sleeves is a little bit like falling off her shoulder. She's working, she's tired, she's not worrying about that. But that is what a lot of men wanted to see. They wanted to see just a little bit of skin. It doesn't matter how, why, where. And again, showing how women had no break, because they are just trying to work. They are trying to do what they have to do to keep their families fed. And yet they are being sexualized by these artists that just wanted to show the world what the women were hiding. The way that Degas found these women that he decided to paint, or at least the subject, even if he recreated it later with models, it's similar to a hunter trying to find easy game. He saw these women in difficult situations that they were not really able to run away from him. And that is how we get to his famous ballerina paintings. So first, we need a little bit of context here, because at the time, it was the 1870s. At the time, ballerinas were in a complicated situation. Obviously, the prosperity of France at the time allowed that a lot of citizens could enjoy this kind of entertainment that was considered a little bit more elite, and not everybody could afford to go to the opera house to watch a show. So his paintings kind of reflect those two sides of society, where the people that would attend the shows, they were in this opulent, this rich and more privileged side. Meanwhile, the ballerinas were in a more complicated situation where a lot of them could not afford to help their families with the money they were making in ballet alone, and they had to resort to other forms of getting money, which included, I don't know how to say this, because I never know with censoring, and I don't want to get in trouble. So basically they had to resort to sex work, and the patrons were a lot of times their clients. So you'd have this man that would come to watch the show, to watch the ballet, and after they would go back to where the ballerinas rest or train or get changed in their private area behind the stage, just to spend time with them and talk to them and decide which ones they want to take home. With that, the ballerinas would get the money that they need for their families and for themselves. In a lot of cases, even the families of the ballerinas would encourage this, because they would see it as an easy way to make money for the family. So this was one of the things that the guy really wanted to show the world, this darker side of ballet. Not because of the arts, but because of the personal life of these girls, who were particularly young compared to the suitors they had. A lot of the men being older, and a lot of the girls being as young as 14. In another of his paintings called Rehearsal of the Ballet on Stage, we can see some of that dark background that was around ballet. You can tell how the men were never really supposed to be there. In the way that Degas paints them, it almost looks deliberate, how these men are breaking into the space that is supposed to be for these girls, but there is absolutely nothing they can do about it. I think that adds another layer of the darkness of this reality that Degas chose to portray. And regardless of the fact that it was reality, it's just his fascination with it is crazy. In another of the paintings, The Star, or just Ballet, a young dancer is the center of this painting, but you can see a figure in black, in a black tuxedo in the back behind the curtains. Through the imposing and ominous look of his body behind those curtains, you can tell again that this was dark, this was scary, and it was something inevitable for these girls. Something they even had to do if they wanted to get better roles at the shows. And then another one that I think really shows what Degas was trying to tell us with his paintings is orchestra musicians. Here you can see the men on the box first. You can see them down in the audience while the girls are on stage performing. And even though they are the show, this painting, it's here to show the men. One of the things that is very obvious to note is that, just as all the other previous ones, these men look significantly older than the girls that are dancing. The girls are nothing but a background in this painting, but the men are really the subjects here. And it's a way that he showed too that even though the girls are the show is for men. The dancers were a product, and the men were the consumer. And these are things that make a lot of sense knowing more about who he was as a person, because there is many recounts of him being a terrible person. He was a insanely horrible misogynist, he was racist, he was an anti-Semitic. There were so many things that he was just a terrible person. And I think it's interesting how through his art, even if the paintings can be seen as subjective of whether he is one of the men that he's trying to portray in these paintings, if he's trying to put himself in that situation of either being or wanting to be one of the men pursuing the ballerinas, or if he's just a bystander observing an inevitable situation and just choosing to depict it, regardless, there is no question that the guy was not a good person. So there's that. And eventually, as he grew older, he was cutting himself up from society to the point that he just became a hermit all alone. And even his art suffered because of that. He lost a little bit of that fame that he initially had, where he was even more recognized than Manet at a point. But all that to say that his art, sadly, is amazing. And I always hate when this is the case, when a horrible, terrible person creates beautiful art, because it's like I feel a sense of guilt because I still see Degas' painting and I feel inspired. I see the ballerinas and I see it on a different light, of course, because when he's painting them, he's trying to depict, like I said, a object of his interest that he saw as something that needed to be studied, something that needed to be observed. These girls needed to be put out there into the world with their secrets. Meanwhile, I see it from the point of the ballerinas being these victims of a situation that they could not escape. And even though it was through the eyes of a horrible man, but it's still an opportunity to see and feel what these girls were going through. Because regardless of what Degas was trying to say, the truth is there. It was happening, it was a reality, and we can see the sadness in these girls of how life was for women back then. But also give a little bit of insight on what it was like to be a woman back then. So I see it in a way, like a way for me to empathize with these women and feel a little bit of the sadness that they were going through. So there is definitely beauty in this art, just probably not the beauty he intended. But I don't know, that's just my take on it. One thing I will say that I did take out of his art and technique, and that I will say inspired me, aside from the subjects themselves and their story, is that one of the things that he used to do a lot, because obviously ballerinas were a very big motif for him, and he was not gonna be bringing his easel and canvas and all of his oils into the opera house. What he used to do is that with pastels he would sketch what he saw so that later he could work at it on his studio. And I know that now, in this more modern technological time, we have cameras that we can rely on and a lot of other things. Obviously, I use it a lot. That is like my main thing. I take pictures. I very rarely paint for live, which is something that I want to change and I want to work on, but it is what it is. But I have been very inspired by other forms of art. And similar to Degas, ballet is one of my favorite things to be inspired from. I know that I have talked about it so much, but I went to watch La Sylphide and it was one of the most beautiful things I have experienced. It was my first time seeing a ballet live, and it opened this new obsession for me that I think will never go away. I literally have 4 more ballet shows booked for the rest of the year and the beginning of the next year that I am going to go watch. And one of the things that made me a little sad is that even though I felt so inspired by them and I really wanted to paint something inspired by the ballet that I saw, I obviously couldn't take pictures, which is 100% understandable and that's good and all, but I wanted to be able to capture what I saw in a painting. So I don't know why I never thought of this, but after reading about Degas and the way that he would sketch the ballerinas at the shows, it just gave me that idea of like, of course, I can just bring a sketchbook and some little charcoals and paint or draw as I watch so that I can work on it later. So I am actually very excited for that because I think it's, I forget the date, but I know it's in September. The first show that I'm gonna go this year, it's I think middle of September. So I am so excited now. I'm getting everything ready. I'm getting some nice new charcoal pencils and a little sketchbook that I can just put in my tiny bag and bring it and not be a nuisance, because I don't want to be like a mess just pulling out a big sketchbook and being annoying, obviously. So I am super excited for that, and I sadly have to thank Degas for that. I am a Degas hater. I don't think I need to explain why, but his art is beautiful. And I wanted to share a little bit of what I learned this week because I thought it was really interesting. I always think it's interesting when you learn about the twisted lives that some of these artists live. Obviously some way darker than others, but it does show how much your art is tied up to who you are and how you experience life, the things that you see, the things that you hear, the things that you consume. I think that that's something that I really need to work on my own personal art, because I don't feel like I do enough art that reflects my life. And part of that is because I feel like for the longest time I wasn't consuming enough art. I wasn't consuming enough inspiration in general. But lately I have been changing that a lot, and I am so excited to start making more art that reflects that. And yeah, I think that even from people like Degas there is something to be learned, so here it is. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will be back this week with an art vlog. I will be changing those too. I feel like my art vlogs lately have been a little bit boring because I basically just sit in my house and talk. So I will be showing a little bit more of my life outside my house, art related of course, like all of the art I consume when I go out and the things I do to inspire myself, when I work on the behind the scenes for like studying for these videos or sketching before paintings, all of that. So yeah, I'm excited for that and I hope you like it. Bye!